Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Sophia Arend, and I am a senior analyst at the Global Blockchain Business Council, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth installment of our GBBC Virtual Members Forum with GBBC member EY. So for the coming months, the GBBC will be hosting bi-weekly live global webinars to showcase the innovative work of our members around the world. And today we have the pleasure to be joined by Paul Brody, EY Global Blockchain Leader, and Mark MacDonald, EY Global Finance Management Leader, for a presentation and live audience Q&A on EY's public finance management blockchain and how we can improve public finance management in a post-COVID-19 world. By way of background, Paul is EY's global blockchain leader. He is responsible for driving EY's strategy and initiatives and investments in blockchain and has extensive experience in the areas of IoT, supply chain and operations, and business strategy. Paul has 20 years of consulting and strategy experience in mobile and electronics, and prior to joining EY, he served as vice president and global industry leader of electronics at a multinational technology company. Paul earned a bachelor's degree in economics and a certificate in African studies from Princeton University. We are also joined by Mark MacDonald, who is the global solutions leader for EY's public finance manager blockchain. Mark led the implementation of the PFM blockchain for the city of Toronto and the state of Western Australia. And under his direction, the PFM blockchain was chosen as a finalist for the International Monetary Fund's Anti-Corruption Challenge 2020. Mark received a PhD in public policy and a master's in arts and public studies and a bachelor's of science in toxicology. We welcome and encourage your questions at any point during today's webinar and ask that you please submit them in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Without further ado, I'd like to hand things off to Paul and Mark. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Sophia. I really appreciate it. It's very nice to be here. I'm going to give a quick couple minutes of introduction to what EY is doing, and then I'm going to hand this over to Mark. I want to just get a start with focusing on the work that EY is doing sort of more generally and globally around public blockchain technology and where we see the market being headed. And then Mark's going to dive more deeply into the core technology. For the last year or so, there's been a lot of challenges in the world of blockchain, right? I think large companies have stopped sort of playing with enterprise blockchains just to say that they were doing something. Lots of volatility in the crypto asset space, and of course, quite a bit of regulatory uncertainty taking shape as well. And to be honest, this is very much something that we should expect, right? This is normal for new technologies. I pull up this slide, it's one of my favorites because I like to remind people that hype cycles are normal. And if you go back to 2002 and you look at this stuff, people at the time were saying, hey, this is silly and this is pointless. We use it every single day. Right, that's just how technology goes. It goes through the waves, and it's actually after people have sort of dissed and dismissed the technology that it often becomes its most useful. And so we're seeing that cycle repeat itself again in the world of blockchain. For EY, the last year, notwithstanding some of those challenges, has still been very good. The pace of growth isn't quite as blistering as it was before, but we're still clocking up significant numbers of new projects across all of our different areas. Our flagship advisory solution, which is OpsChain, has continued to set out a whole bunch of new clients, and I won't bore you with the long list, but what's really driving implementation in the enterprise and the government is very specific return on investment, whether it's anti-corruption or inventory management and asset management. That's kind of the future. Our mission is very much the same, which is we really believe that blockchains will do for networks of enterprises or business ecosystems what enterprise resource planning software did inside the enterprise. And this also applies for governments, right? Governments are large decentralized ecosystems, and Mark's going to talk about that today and some of the challenges of how to make government and intergovernment cooperation work effectively in a decentralized environment without forcing everybody to use the same technologies everywhere. I think if we look back on the last year, the most unexpected and positive news that we saw was the shift in viewpoints around public blockchains. Historically, what people have tried to do is build these siloed blockchain networks, a logistics network or an automotive manufacturing network or a retail network or a food traceability network. But the problem with these siloed networks is nobody actually wants to join them. Everybody wants to start their own. And the way that works out is that on average, for every one company that is willing to join somebody else's blockchain, 2 companies start their own, right? And that is not a scalable, repeatable model, right? So people are coming to realize that a private siloed blockchain model doesn't work very well. The good news is that for those who have implemented blockchains, they now really come to see that the future blockchain technology is probably going to be open public networks. And the big challenge with open public networks is how do you give people privacy in those environments? Because public networks traditionally haven't had any privacy at all. The good news is over the last 24 months, that technology has matured enormously. If you go back to October 2018, when EY unveiled our first technology for private transactions on public blockchains, it was $100 in computing power to do one of these mathematical proofs. Fast forward to April of last year, and we had it down to $10. And by December, we had it down to 5 cents, right? So that's an enormous improvement. And at 5 cents for a private transaction, it's really at an affordable level for all kinds of entities, right? Additionally, over the last couple of months, we've added a bunch of new features into this environment, including whitelist, blacklist, and audit functionality, so that it's fully ready for a regulatory compliant environment. The other thing that we wanted to do was to make sure that having established the privacy of transaction, we hit some of the other issues as well. Private business logic, discovery and identity of business partners and other agencies that you're working with, synchronizing the state of your business processes with your partners, and properly tokenizing enterprise and government assets so that they can be moved around and transferred. And starting in June of last year, we began a cooperation with Microsoft and Consensus to try to systematically address these in a public domain and open source manner. And what we released about 2 months ago was something called the Baseline Protocol. And our goal with the Baseline Protocol, in cooperation with Microsoft and Consensus, and now more than 20 other companies joining, is to create public domain, open source tools that allow enterprises and governments to transact securely and privately in full regulatory compliance on the public blockchain, and very importantly, without ever putting any sensitive information on the chain itself, right? We actually are about to launch our very first, or have recently launched our first product that's built on this technology. It's called Network Procurement, and it's designed to help companies manage traditional procurement processes in a business network environment, right? And this is done, we picked this one because we believe it has a very compelling enterprise and government return on investment. And the reason this is particularly powerful is because business networks are constantly evolving, and managing business networks is challenging if you think about, okay, I've got subsidiaries, I'm buying and selling them, right? I have subcontracting partners, there's some are in, there's some are out, right? But if you have a business agreement that depends on things like total volume purchase for rebates, right? Aggregated spend for rebates, right? Getting the correct pricing across the whole network of authorized business partners, it's extremely difficult to do that if you're trying to run that procurement process from inside your own entity. And so what we are trying to do is to create a network-based solution that allows companies to manage their broader network and manage their procurement at the network level. Just to give you a quick sense of the kind of return on investment, we have implemented the software licensing procurement solution over at Microsoft, and the payoff has been enormous. 99% reduction in cycle time to produce monthly statements and accounts, 40% reduction in overall cost that we expect to experience when fully deployed, and very importantly, a proper level of transparency and reliability that will lead to reduced kind of litigation and misunderstanding between parties. So we know the ROI is there, and now we can do this kind of work on public networks with no setup time, no barriers to entry, no proprietary infrastructure to build and deploy. I want to finish up before I hand over to Mark with just a quick thought about kind of the current environment, the coronavirus crisis. People tend to think, oh, what's going to happen to technology to accelerate or slow down? I can say, but what I can say is if you look at the history of technological change during times of crisis, the answer is crises tend to not stop technological change. In fact, sometimes they accelerate it, right? And so the only really consistent theme in looking at technology adoption over the last 50 years is that it tends to get faster at every cycle. And this one, I think, is going to be a particularly powerful catalyst for rapid digitalization. So that's my kind of quick introduction. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Mark. And if you want to know more about what we're doing, you can visit blockchain.ey.com and you can see some of our services and get links to all of our information. Mark, thank you for joining us. I'm handing it over to you now.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Paul. I think you hopefully, let me just get the share going. There we are. Okay, hopefully people can see the screen now.
Yes, indeed.
All right. There we go. Okay, so listen, I'm going to hopefully make this a seamless bridge to what Paul was saying, and that is in part by design, but it's actually, I think, most fundamentally really just a reflection of the way that we are seeing picking up on Paul's last comment about what we are seeing as the expected and absolutely realized pace of change associated with the COVID circumstance that we're all living with at the moment. In fact, I work with governments every single day, and I can tell you that the pace of digitalization, the pace of attention to using technology in the appropriate way to enhance our ability to serve citizens, to serve the customers of government, to serve the taxpayers who fund government is absolutely at the top of the agenda. There are many dimensions of that agenda, and I'll get into a few of those here this morning. But generally speaking, this is absolutely part of both the current and very much the future of the way that government acts. So again, I'd just like to say thank you to the council. We love to have these opportunities to share, and we do it, I think, appropriately, if I can say that, with the intention of truly sharing. So we recognize that, yes, EY is making our own contribution and carrying out our own activities in this space, but we do this very much in the spirit of what we are actually seeing, which is that there are significant benefits to the growth and the application of blockchain. Again, in my own personal area, particularly in the areas of public budgeting, public finance management, and broader delivery of government services. And because of those benefits, it does everybody good to capture them as quickly and as significantly as possible. So this is a reflection of what we're doing, but it is also a reflection of a contribution to the broader community. So what I'm going to do is I'll just give you a quick introduction to what our public finance manager actually is. The short version from a technical perspective is that it is very, very consistent, and as you'll see here as a moment, it's part of our overall ops chain stack. As Paul was saying, as ultimately we go public in this, it's all about that. It rests on our ability to tokenize government assets, to tokenize the conditions under which government monies are being spent and executed, and therefore greatly enhances transparency, greatly enhances accountability, which is essentially on the, let's call it the legalistic side of what we're doing, but as if not even more importantly, it greatly enhances the efficiency and the effectiveness of decision making, and therefore of the actual services that are being delivered. And that, more than anything, is why we have built that. I'll get back to that in a moment. Talk to you a little bit about just some high-level introductions, and you'll see some slides that kind of mirror what Paul was saying about, for instance, the Microsoft example. We'll just kind of highlight some of the benefits that we're seeing in a couple of real-life cases, and then talk a little bit about what's next. So the public finance manager is, yes, it is a blockchain solution, but it is also a business solution. And more than anything, that's why we have built this. So I was introduced as EY's global leader for the public finance management space. and that means a lot of things. But when you think about the complexity and the sheer scale of government, every dollar that is spent by a government, every intention that is established and then carried through by a government is in one way or another affected through its public budgets. And that's essentially the common in every country around the world. And there is a challenge that exists in essentially every country around the world, and that is to be able to have a purposeful, integrated, joined up view in near to real time to support decision making about what I spend my money on, which is essentially my statutory obligation. So legally, I have to report what I have spent my money on, but in a managerial sense, in a program management sense, in the ability to deliver enhanced services to citizens and the customers and the communities of government, we need to understand not just what I'm spending money on, but how I'm spending it. And even more importantly than that is being able to understand the effectiveness, so essentially what I achieve. And being able to connect what I spend my money on to how I spend it, to what we get for it, what we are able to achieve in society for that. Being able to connect that is essentially the holy grail of public budgeting. And in today's information management world, we're pretty good at understanding what we spend our money on. We are unable at the moment, across the complexity of government's delivery system, to be able to answer, though, in real time, these other two components in an integrated, sort of platform-based way. And as Paul was saying, what blockchain can do across organizations, across different authorities in a public sector system world is essentially where the true value of this comes forward. And so one of the things that hopefully you'll be left with here is that the EY Public Finance Manager is a business solution enabled obviously by the blockchain technology, and its purpose is to essentially integrate financial and non-financial components of the way that governments work into one shared view. We do that by tokenizing various assets. Again, the ability to attach, in a sense, non-financial conditions to public budgets is essentially what we're talking about here. We do that, and again, I think Paul has already given you the overall structure. We do that by making sure that all of our solutions are in fact reinforcing to each other. And EY Public Finance Manager is no different. It is at the highest level of technical as well as business solution integrity, and it's one of the major solutions that we continually invest in. And again, kind of the business side of this is to why you would do this. Well, this integrated system essentially exists between those members of government, the treasuries and finances. I sit here in Canada, so the treasuries and finances in a Westminster system, your treasury, the various budget authorities that exist in the United States, right? They have a responsibility around allocating money and reporting on it, but it is the individual departments, it is the individual program managers that have the responsibility to actually execute those budgets. And then on the right-hand side, there is an increasing complexity associated with the actual delivery chains. And again, entirely consistent with the private sector concepts that Paul was talking about. It is about the ability to share information, to essentially have that joined up record of the transactions that are taking place in an integrated way between the financial and the non-financial components of that provide a much richer opportunity for us to understand what we're spending our money on, how we're spending it, what we're getting for it. That informs better decision making, and through better decision making, that actually leads to better service delivery. And ultimately, again, that's what we as EY, but I think all of us as citizens in our various countries around the world in our jurisdictions would recognize as essentially being the purpose of government. So the implementation programs, and I'll just highlight a couple. There were a few others that were referenced there, the early stage work that we're doing with the IMF, a little bit with the World Bank as well. But we want to talk to you just about two of the implementations that we've got underway. One of them is with the City of Toronto, which is where I live, and it has to do essentially with what you would characterize as being a shared services blockchain solution. Here again, in a public budgeting context for a city, and again, most cities around the world share this sort of common structure. They are funded in large part through two major sources of revenue. One of them are direct fees, and the other is taxes. And we have an obligation legally to be able to report the way that we spend both sides of that sort of funding equation. But when we bring a service together, and it's funded by two different points of entry, but the actual service is done in an integrated way, and then that service is provided to multiple divisions of delivery agents, agencies, and so forth, all of a sudden you can start to see the complexity in the way that we need to be able to reconcile the financial side of it, to be able to manage the asset and the delivery side of that. And that's just within a city operating context. When you add to it the complexity that there are then a whole series of external actors in a supply chain, delivery agents, where we have done this here is in fleet services. Fleet is just that. So it's cars and trucks and the other types of machinery that actually are used by various city divisions. You can just imagine the complexity of the outside the city environment. And what we've done is through the blockchain, we've been able to create a solution that allows for a significant enhancement to our capability to deliver that service efficiently and effectively. And again, kind of mirroring the same thing that Paul was talking about, what we see is real value actually being delivered. And so kind of a from to, there's a significant reduction in lag time in the exchange of financial information, in the exchange of effort associated with that. The ability to inform decisions in essentially a real-time or a near to real-time perspective, allow every actor along that chain of production to essentially do a better job. And that's got no reflection on intent or historical practice. It's just that we're now in a different operating environment as a result of the solution. And so it comes with that significant value. We get ourselves, again, I said it's a shared services application. Well, one of the things you want to be able to do, again, is you want to be able to allocate the real cost of service across various operating divisions and do that in an accurate way. And so rather than having kind of nominal budget allocations, we're now able to do that based on actuals. That reduces the churn time, changes the nature of the conversation, and essentially gets us into a better operating perspective. And again, better operating perspective, better administrative efficiency leads ultimately to better outcomes for the recipients of those services. In Western Australia, a little farther away from Toronto, but here at the state level, essentially what we've been doing is again very similar sort of story about complexity in the number of actors that are involved. From Treasury, Department of Education, Department of Finance, maintenance, and so forth. The case here is really one of a minor capital works program as it relates to schools. And again, in every jurisdiction around the world, there will be some variation of exactly this story. And it is that, the school wants to have a repair conducted. There's some way for them to lodge the request for that. But ultimately, because there is the expenditure of public money associated with that, it's not just as simple as picking up the phone and finding a contractor. It is, in fact, executing the authorities, being able to report, being able to, again, sort of prove the public value associated with that. And And that's a massively complicated thing to do. And so, as simple as it sounds, at the school, I request maintenance, somebody allocates the job, we hire a contractor, and you put it into the actual context of government, you have to pay, you have to do the reconciliation to actually a program budget, and ultimately you are legally responsible for being able to perform the I'll call it an audit function, but it's really a performance function. It's not just that you did it, it's that you, which is the what, it's that you did it well, and in fact it was successful. And so that again becomes about the integration of this information. And just as essentially, and we're probably talking in part to the converted here, but the ability to demonstrate value again just comes absolutely screaming to the fore. It's about reduced administrative cost. It's about transparency. It's about shared information and the understanding of what is going on, reflecting and respecting the individual authorities, but essentially joining and integrating that up. And again, that's the power of working across organizations in a new informational basis. So what's next? I'll talk at kind of a general level, and then I'll maybe just in today's day and age, you probably need to have just at least some reference to COVID, and I'll end it there. What we see, and what I've shared to you here are essentially two types of government intervention where they're spending money. It's the expenditure side of government. But the expenditure side of government is actually matched by the regulatory side of government, the revenue side of government, and the direct delivery. So citizens like you and I we've got all sorts of individual transactions taking place between the various governments that we interact with, whether it's in the city that we live in, whether it's in a federal state, a province, or a state that you live in, and then obviously the national circumstance. We've got so many of these kind of sticky, transactionally oriented, and in the complexity of the way that government works, difficult to execute, difficult to integrate, diffused and decentralized delivery systems. And one of the barriers to increased efficiency and effectiveness in that is the ability to understand, I'm going to say it again, what we're spending money on, how we're spending it, and what's the effectiveness of that. And in a blockchain world, we think that the ability to significantly improve the delivery of government outcomes, the outputs and the outcomes, and therefore its legitimacy within society actually goes up quite dramatically. Early days, bold statement, we get that, but undoubtedly, this is what the future holds. Let me just close with one last little kind of anecdote, if you will, but it's an emerging one. It has emerged in almost every country in the world, obviously, and that is how would, for instance, the EY Public Finance Manager be applied in the working condition that we're facing today. And it's essentially as easy as saying that the government responses beyond the public health side are essentially a form of an expenditure program. So they are allocating monies. They're allocating monies to us as individuals to support us that have lost our jobs. They're supporting monies that go to the execution and the delivery of public service. They are supporting transfers that go to small and medium and larger enterprises, the economy itself. And every one of those investments that is being made comes with it a series of conditions. And those conditions can be about fiduciary responsibility, they can be about regulation, they can be about reporting, and they can be about performance and effectiveness. And in a blockchain world, in an EY-PFM blockchain world, the ability to attach that budget allocation to the expected value that is being delivered is something that undoubtedly is going to need to be reconciled. Those two things are going to have to come together. And I think we, and hopefully you, would see that perhaps one of the things that can be done most effectively, flexibly, and at scale is to think about integrating those worlds delivering those programs for the optimal reason of being able to actually prove that it was money well invested and it has had the positive impact that was expected and intended, that can be enhanced very much in a blockchain world. So I'll leave it there. I shout out to questions and so forth, the broader team, but just essentially say thank you and happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark and Paul. We've had several questions come in. I think one of our first questions and a good starting point perhaps is, so for a company, or in this case, maybe a government that's interested in implementing blockchain, where should they start and what kind of questions would you, EY, ask them to ensure that a blockchain solution was right for them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Paul, why don't I start and then you come in. I would say, and hopefully you got this come through. To me, it has to speak to purpose first. So we don't experiment here. This is not, you know, a science project. This is about affecting a completely, well, essentially enhancing our ability to discharge an existing responsibility. And so the advice that we would give, and in fact, the only way that we engage, is to actually go to purpose first. And so in all of the cases, we spend a very significant amount of time actually dealing with, you know, what is the problem you're trying to address? What is the solution that you would actually like to see result from this? And then it's a matter of saying, by the way, you know, blockchain can be massively powerful, and we think the only, like, essentially the best solution in certain circumstances. But if through the examination of that solution, it turns out to be a slightly different circumstance, then you go down a different path. So let's just assume that it's, say, for instance, in one of the cases where you've got many cross-organizational authorities, you're trying to connect a network of actors essentially to a common sort of purpose. Well, then we get into the details about, you know, who needs to be involved, what's the characteristic of that network. Again, always though grounded and referenced to what is the impact that you're trying to achieve, why is it that you're trying to achieve it, and then we can deal with the technical details from there. Paul, I'm sure that's the same that we do well, I know that it's the same that we do in the private sector.
It is indeed. I couldn't add anything to your answer. It was excellent. Thank you, Mark.
We had another question come in about sort of your biggest challenges with this project. EY has invested a lot in the blockchain space, and you private and public sector solutions. Maybe you could speak to particularly what are the challenges with creating a solution for the public sector?
I can sort of speak generally from a blockchain perspective. The number one issue is blockchains are network solutions. And so what comes up over and over again is how do you get people to onboard into another network? That's always the number one issue, is how to scale the network. You know, in the case of public blockchains for commercial users, our focus is on allowing people to use all the same network. If you're talking about the public sector, right, there's a powerful incentive by governments that you know, for parties to join in pursuit of access and budget and accountability, but it's still the same issue whether it's public or private sector, which is it's not the technology, it's the partner onboarding that I think is always the number one issue. Mark, what's your experience been?
Yeah, well, absolutely the same. In the public sector in particular, there's this, and we all know why this is the case, because these are, you know, the governments are legal entities and they're acting on society's behalf, and so they have a whole series of authorities, but they have limits to those authorities as well. And so being able to be really, really clear about, you know, essentially who has the right to act in a particular way, and what is the kind of first of all, what is the statutory or the legal relationship that we're actually trying to structure and exchange around. That is actually very, very important. And so it exists in a non-blockchain world, but it also exists in a blockchain world. And so many of the clients that we're talking to, they want the assurance, and it's, you know, when you get into the details, it's actually fairly easy to demonstrate, but they want the assurance that there is protection of privacy, that there's protection of security, that this is in fact an appropriate use, and what governments would call a legitimate use and basis upon which to discharge their public responsibility. And again, the details can be worked out really, really quickly. The second one that I would say, and it's kind of related to this, is that I'm still finding that people don't believe the power of blockchain. They don't believe its flexibility and its ability to actually scale until they see it. And then when they see it, they're like, wow. And so I think there is still, at least in the people that I sometimes talk to, is that there's still just this, it's almost like it hasn't made itself into kind of that ubiquitous scaled sort of use that people just, oh, of course, well, that's blockchain. Well, of course it works. It's more just people kind of, they want to see it before they can believe it. But when they do see it, it's just, wow, I had no idea it was that powerful and essentially that flexible.
Yeah, we definitely had a question about the amount of time that you spend sort of educating stakeholders on this technology. I think
it varies enormously, right? So we got some stakeholders who show up and they're very sophisticated in their knowledge of this technology. We got others who are excited about it, but they're also very wary, right? And there's a lot of misunderstandings out there. We get lots of people all the time who are saying things like, well, let's do a proof of concept. No, this technology is proven. It's been around for more than a decade, right? We can do a pilot for your particular use case, but I think there's a lot of stuff like that. One of the things that helps a lot is we've hired and we have some mathematicians and cryptographers, and we were able to tell people, like, you know, these things can be mathematically proven to be true. We can show people how you mathematically prove something to be true. We have auditors. We sign off on the financial statements of more than 130 companies that do material amounts of business on blockchain technology. So we just try to show people the qualifications. We show people the mechanics. We're willing to go very in depth into the core technology and the math. But it's a huge spectrum. Some people are very sophisticated and they come straight to the point, and others they're excited but maybe skeptical and a little bit nervous.
At the beginning, you touched on sort of the rate of digitization and kind of how COVID-19 could be a catalyst for that. We had a question that's wondering, what other processes already need to be digitized in order to use the solution? I mean, can you leapfrog existing systems? Yeah, love to hear your thoughts.
Mark?
Yeah, so I mean, I would actually start by saying that again, where it kind of goes back to purpose, right? Like, I don't think we want to, you know, so-called automate, or we don't want to, you know, deal with known inefficiencies or ineffectiveness in business processes. And so, again, we would strongly encourage people to be able to, you know, kind of deal with those sorts of issues, as well as thinking about how you can apply technology like this. But that goes the same for every technology that we implement and that we're involved with. So I think that's kind of a across the board sort of statement. The unique thing about blockchain, though, is that it's not like it's static. It's not like it just exists at one implementation and then that's it forever. It has actually, you know, very, very flexible for continued sort of improvement. The thing that I'm finding most powerful about this is that, and again, it's by design, but it's also the effectiveness part of this, is that what we're most interested in doing is connecting different types of technology stacks together, because it is about that network interaction. It is about that shared interaction and transaction that we're actually addressing. And we can do that. Blockchain can do that. The technology enables us to go really advanced in that integration layer without actually have it or allowing to have there be differences underlying that. And I think that's a huge advantage against other types of technology. And it's a huge factor in its flexibility and its ability to scale.
Absolutely. I know we've talked about governments using this technology. Do you expect, and I mean, is there the possibility that maybe large foundations or philanthropies could use it as well, or some version of it?
I think Marcus has frozen up momentarily. Did you hear the question, Mark?
I didn't. Do you want to go, Paul? Sorry, rather than repeat
Sure.
it.
I would say the answer is yes. In fact, Mark mentioned this before, or you mentioned in the introduction. We just won this. We're finalists in this IMF competition, right? At the end of the day, foreign aid, all types of public sector budgeting are good candidates for this, right? The issue that comes up over and over again is just how long it takes to get responses back. So it's not that governments or foreign agencies don't know how the money is being spent. They just can't get the results back fast enough to really course correct in a timely manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody mentioned that, you know, the U.S. has maybe 50K, or the U.S. municipalities have significant delays in reporting, and maybe take up to 9 months to report the previous year's financials. So a clear gap there. And now we're already awarding grants and aid for COVID. Is there a way to retroactively use some of that information to see how the outcomes have gone, say if you implement the system later?
Well, I mean, there's in the ideal setting, what you would want to do is you would want to do this at the front, right? So you know what that dollar needs to be spent on, right? As it goes out. Yeah, there's lots of ways to obviously do the evaluations and the audits essentially associated with that. I think the point is that we want to try and avoid that, because that's a very expensive way to do what going in is actually a fairly simple thing to affect. And so I think our strong recommendation would be that while you can do ex post audits, let's actually structure this in the right way going in.
Just moving down the question list, we have here a question about EY and how you've been a public proponent of public blockchains. And if you could speak to this system and how it provides kind of the best of both private and public blockchain, just kind of expand on what you've already said.
Whoops, I was muted. Sorry. The big value proposition and our vision around public blockchains isn't that public blockchains are the only way to go. What we like is we believe they're the fastest, simplest way to go in the long run. But we know that not every organization is ready to go that way. And in fact, we still do most of our implementations on private blockchain. But what works really well about our approach toward public blockchains is it's like the world that existed around cloud or around the intranet and the internet, right? By building on the same technology platforms, we can much more easily migrate companies from private to public in the future. And we can build our core technology in a way that runs in both environments, because we run on the Ethereum platform. So we can run on a private instance of Ethereum, we can run on Quorum, we can run on Hyperledger Besu, and our stuff can also work in the public environment. So it's a best of both worlds options. Secondly, and this is something that's not really well appreciated, if you choose to run a private blockchain, and you do so with our technologies, with the baseline technology, you're creating an environment that's substantially more secure than a traditional private blockchain. Traditional private blockchains, their primary mechanism of security is that they decide which parties have access to the network. And that controls access to the network. But once you get into the network, a lot of the core information in the network is visible to everybody. Right? When you use the EY baseline approach towards building a private network, not only do you control access to the network, but within the network, we apply all the same core privacy technologies that we do in a fully public environment, which means that at the transaction level, at the contract level, we have privacy implemented, not just at the network level. So it's a much more redundant belt and suspenders approach, and it gives entities a great deal of flexibility as to how they choose to evolve their infrastructure over time.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to end. We're coming up on the hour. Thank you so much for taking the time to answer our questions following the presentation. We had plenty of interest and plenty of interesting questions come through. So thank you so much, Paul and Mark, for joining us. It's been really great to hear about the solution. We look forward
Thanks for
to
having
seeing
us.
how it definitely improves outcomes over time and during these unprecedented times. Thank you to everyone who joined today's webinar. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the GBBC's YouTube, so we will send those links around. We also encourage us on May 28th Eastern Time at the same time for a webinar with GBBC member Steptoe, a leading global law firm. We also have a fireside chat tomorrow with GBBC's CEO Sandra Rowe and Procter & Gamble's Chief Technology Innovation Officer Alan Bohm at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The link to register is available on GBB's social media and events page, but we will also send around the webinar link following this. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.